Soil Assembly by Johanna Seelemann. With a design practice exploring material cultures related to mundane objects and their context, production systems and ecological cycles, designers Johanna Seelemann's practice embraces a multidisciplinary approach. This installation, Soil Assembly, is nascent work done in collaboration with Fiona Raby of Dun & Raby, a composer, soil scientist, and an animator. It revolves around a redefinition of human society's relationship with soil. Imagine an object, unbound by human-centered ways of perception. An object intended for multiple generations to change our sense of time. An object that dissolves the human world into the soil world. How many languages are there for an object designed to safeguard and care? What does it mean to build a machine that is more like an octopus, a fungus, a forest? Imagine an object which challenges the idea that intelligence is something uniquely or even especially human at all. Farming was once a negotiation between humans and the soil. Now, it is an isolated process, detached from the rhythm of the ground. New objects replace that negotiation in a self-contained ecosystem. Those machines that feed us no longer exploit the land. Soil detached and closed-loop holistic human food generators. They no longer ask the soil for sustenance, nor depend on artificial fertilizers. Hydroponics, aquaponics, aeroponics, systems where roots never cling to ground, where food production is a closed loop, a perpetual motion of nutrients, energy, and human excreta. Compost, which exits the body and enters the earth, circulating within an artificial metabolism. The soil, however, is not excluded. It folds time into matter, resonating with the seasons. To interact with it, we design objects that operate in geological time. Parent material units to feed the soil over hundreds of years. Massive bodies of stone and mineral placed within the landscape as monuments, as nourishment, dissolving the human world into the rhizosphere. Burrowing like a screw in parent material layers, composed of phosphorus-rich rock, limestone, granite, each chosen for their dissolution. Acid and alkaline rain unravels them slowly, feeding the ground beyond the needs of humans. Many years from now, they may have transformed, turned themselves into raw material for new life, ecologically distributed. Then, a huge, substantial object, not a machine of extraction, but one of vanguard. Multi-generational device for soil protection and regeneration. An imperceptibly slow vehicle farming soil, engineered to move at the pace of soil restoration. Community-owned, passed on from generation to generation. 100 years to cross a landscape, its sole function to hold space, to exclude human and sheep interference, keeping them away to ensure regeneration. Redirecting the efforts and industrial expertise of a mechanized culture towards restoration is to understand that care must unfold over centuries. We are the makers of one another, the products of so many other species. We gestate and are gestated, inhale and ingest matter in a life game of new combinations. We are entangled with the land, with the life, with all matter in flux, within cycles of constant renewal. We are inseparable from all other organisms. We are rooted in the landscape, and only possible through landscape. We transform like matter does. We are a few of many who tend to the earth, who know no extraction, no resource, no human timescale, no limits to our care, no division of human and ecology to constrain us. We declare kinship with all things that nourish, with all the processes that sustain us, that break down and rebuild, that allow us to live. We know only objects that arise with purpose, then dissolve to form others. We are constructors of cycles, nurturers of the ground, keepers of the rhythm-binding seasons to the land. We cannot know your exact path, nor can you know ours.
Velkomin. Welcome to the source. The source is both an ode to beginnings and an ode to origins, like the word in Icelandic uppspretta paints up for us very clearly. It is an ode to infinite potential, endless possibilities of the beginnings. It is also an ode to the origins of everything. The origins of matter, the origins of inspiration, ideas, the origin of us. It is an invitation to pause for a moment, make halt, reflect, look back, look around us, and maybe realize that we're actually standing on the shoulders of giants. We're standing on the shoulders of people that came before us, and it's an invitation to start to create from what we have already for the people that will follow. And we'll do this through an amazing journey together today, a journey back to the source. We'll do this in a couple of different sessions with many people who have come here out of their generosity from France, Italy, Mexico. Actually, the last one, Fernando, the first speaker, kind of missed his flight, but arrived in time yesterday, very late, so I'm hoping that he got to see a little bit of the lava. It will be exciting to see, maybe the only one, from out of us that actually got to see that origin. We will do the morning through a sort of a travel. Now there's a program behind me now, here. See, this is the morning, so I encourage you to take a photo, keep it in your pocket. So we will travel and look for the future in the past through materially and experientially sensitive and contextual sensitive projects. Then we continue after lunch we will continue to travel a little bit and dwell in time, in the aspect of time, like Johanna painted so clearly for us before. And then in the end, there's the message in the bottle. Storytelling in various forms. Have you taken a photo? Because we're going to be extremely rigid on time. Because this is a time travel back to the journey, back to the source. So you'll have to be here, when we start. You can't miss a thing. Hi to people sitting somewhere out in the world, having this little window into our journey through live streaming on Dezeen, and we do that through the collaboration with Business Iceland. Are you ready? Okay. Okay, not quite awake yet. Okay, so let's give it up for Fernando.
Fernando Laposse, designer. Specializing in transforming humble natural materials into refined design pieces, Fernando Laposse has worked extensively with overlooked plant fibers indigenous to his native Mexico, such as sisal, loofah, and corn leaves. In his work, materials and their historical and cultural ties to a particular location and its people take center stage. Laposse is the recipient of the Dezeen Awards 2024.
Great. Hello, everyone. Thank you for having me. Made it to the nick of time after all missed flights, but super happy to be here. And I'll get straight into it. Yes, so my name is Fernando Laposse. I'm a designer from Mexico. I lived and studied in the UK, in St. Jose Martins, and even though I studied product design, I now consider myself somewhere of a hybrid between a designer and an artisan, as most of my pieces are very labor-intensive, very handmade, and typically handmade by me first, and then in collaboration with communities. And while speaking about communities, today I'm going to focus my presentation especially on sort of the backstory behind a lot of my pieces. I'd like to take this opportunity to talk about this because I think you can always go online and look at the final pieces, but this insight into the world behind them, I think, is a great opportunity to be talking about them. So I spend my time mostly between Mexico City and this town, Totomoxtle. Totomoxtle is an indigenous farming community which is situated about 80 kilometers from the oldest archaeological site of corn domestication. This means, the area in which all the corn of the world was started. It's a really arid area, almost a desert, but not quite, with soil that is, not very promising on first glance for agriculture, but it's just a testament of the ingenuity of the ancient Mexicans to be able to understand plants to a fantastic degree and to give us a lot of the produce that is essential for a lot of the world cuisines today. Things like corn, things like tomatoes, things like chilies were all domesticated in these valleys. Corn is like a very interesting plant because it is considered one of the first sort of man-made plants. If you look at what we know as corn today, it doesn't really exist in nature, and it cannot exist without the help of men. So this is a small illustration of what corn used to look like about 7,000 or 9,000 years ago. Its wild relative is called teosinte, and from selective breeding processes, it's been such a drastic transformation that now corn looks the way it does. But it's so tightly packed under so many layers of leaves that if you leave a corn through its full cycle, it just kind of choked itself. It needs the hand of man to keep being corn. And without corn, we wouldn't have had the great civilizations of Mexico and Central America. And it's just fascinating how we've sort of shaped nature to our needs, but also nature has shaped us. I had the privilege to really start understanding these processes and understand this area when I was 6 years old, thanks to this man, Delfino. Delfino was someone that used to work in my dad's bakery, and Totomoxtle is his village. And I remember the first times that I went there, I was really interested in seeing how everything was different, you know. People spoke a different language, not Spanish. Mixteco is their native indigenous language. And they did everything differently, you know, different celebrations, different ways of looking at nature. And possibly the most interesting thing is that even their fruits and vegetables were different, you know. It was completely different from what we saw in Mexico City. So I think Mexico is just incredible in terms of the diversity of agricultural produce, but also the diversity of people that we have within the same country. I think for me it was also really interesting from that young age to learn about the Milpa system. The Milpa system is an indigenous permaculture system which ensures soil fertility. You don't need to do crop rotation with the Milpa system. It's about combining what we call the three sisters, corn, beans, and pumpkins together to ensure that nitrogen gets fixed back into the soil through the beans. The corn protects the beans from insects by giving it a surface to grow on high above the ground. And the pumpkins covered all the soil, fixing humidity in the soil, which in a very dry area like this is very essential, but also blocking it from weeds. So it's a system that doesn't require fertilizers, that doesn't require pesticides, that doesn't require crop rotation. But it's a system that is really sort of against how we've come to create modern agricultural systems. I don't know if you know this, but corn is now the most planted grain in the world, more than wheat, more than rice, by a mile. Yet, I would dare to say that corn is not really planted for food purposes anymore. In most countries, food is processed into sweeteners, into livestock feed, and more recently, for starches to create bioplastics and the such, which I think is really silly. To create food in a place where people need food, to then turn it into disposable plastics, for me, it makes no sense. So in a way, corn has become this almost product that is not related to food. And this has caused a lot of tensions, especially when putting into comparison the place where it all started. And for me, it's been really interesting to see how these tensions arrive from trade deals. You know, the other kind of very fictitious thing that we've created, which is our economic systems. This kind of came to a very pivotal moment with the creation of NAFTA, the North American Free Trade Agreement between the United States, Canada, and Mexico, where it really flipped agriculture on its head in Mexico. It's from one year to the next collapsed all the markets. The price of corn fell to a fifth of its price. And so what happens with farmers that base all their livelihood in a crop that loses all of its value through a decision taken by politicians across, internationally? So throughout this presentation, you're going to see a lot of little videos of interviews with some of the subjects that I like to interview. This is how I work. I do a lot of research, and then that informs my design decisions. So this is Delfino again, about 30 years after that first photograph, and he's going to talk a lot about
Aquí nosotros estamos abandonados. Lo más triste también es de que nosotros lo que cultivamos aquí tampoco ya no se puede vender. Dicen que es mejor el maíz que viene de la industria, que el maíz de acá pues no pesa mucho y la gente pues ya no quiere cultivar, ya no quiere trabajar, mejor se va. Yo recuerdo que se cultivaba y había mucha tierra fértil, pero desde el momento que vino la industria de fuera, ya vino a cambiar todo. Todos los químicos que se le aplica a la planta, al maíz, al frijol, vino a erosionar también la tierra. Ya veo que en vez de árboles o tierra para cultivar, hay piedras. Aquí están creciendo las piedras en vez de árboles. Pero ya nos dimos cuenta que ese químico nos está afectando y por eso decidimos cambiar.
So, yeah, I mean, Delfino's first language is Mixteco, and in Mixteco there's no word for erosion. So there's sometimes these wonderful kind of translations that they do into Spanish where, you know, to describe erosion because of this influx of chemicals that came with the NAFTA change, he describes erosion as rocks growing instead of trees. You know, very powerful metaphors. So I think for me, part of the project is also showing this, how these global market changes can affect subsistence farmers. Because what happened there was it became a situation where nothing could grow anymore. And so, in turn, most farmers, most male farmers, had to migrate, which caused another social crisis, a crisis of migration. And probably the best person to talk about this is Esmeralda, who's one of the women that work in the studio in Totomoxtle. Esmeralda lost a couple of her brothers trying to cross the border into the United States. So I think her story is particularly powerful.
Hay veces que hay años que no ves a tus hijos que se van a Estados Unidos a trabajar y simplemente en el camino pierden la vida. Y sería muy bonito que el día de mañana hubiera un trabajo, hubiera una estabilidad para nosotros, para que también nosotros no tengamos esa necesidad de buscar algo económico en otro lugar. La mujer se dedica a estar en la casa, a cuidar los niños, no tiene un papel relevante, digamos, porque nunca aportamos algo económico.
So this is another interesting thing, that after this mass migration of the men, the town became a town of women, which poses another series of challenges, but also opportunities. I think a lot of what I try to do with my work as well is to humanize migration, especially in the current political state. I think it's more important than ever to stress the fact that the majority of rural workers migrating to the United States, especially, are not escaping violence, and they're certainly not chasing the American millionaire dream. None of them wants to come back with like a Lamborghini in a few years. They are rather victims of a global system which is incompatible with this traditional lifestyle. So I think my challenge was, how can we bring back heirloom corn without following this model of extracting this really good grain to sell it to a fancy chef in New York or in Mexico City. So the answer for me was the husks, the leaves that surround the grain are super colorful, and all these colors are natural. They grow like that from the soil. I don't dye them in any way or paint them in any way. And this is testament to that amazing diversity that we have through this selective breeding process that took thousands of years. So I'm limited by the size of the leaves, and so the best sort of use of them is to create marquetry. Marquetry is a traditional woodworking technique, very European, where you take very thin slices of wood, veneer, to create decorative surfaces in furniture. So this became the most sort of efficient use of the material. And I think what's really nice is that it almost substitutes very exotic hardwoods like purple heart or rosewood or things like that. But these are from leaves that are harvested every 6 months and as part of a byproduct of creating food. So these are all images of furniture. I've also created sort of these modular systems to cover walls for interiors. And I think something that's very nice is that you can kind of calculate what color goes next to it, but you never have full control, And this has been also like a really interesting process of almost re-educating also consumers, and especially interior designers, which are a nightmare, you know, because they always want like, you know, they write to me and they're like, can I have your exact Pantone catalog of the exact tones that we're gonna get? It's like, no, that's impossible. But anyways, the big challenge is creating a working system. And the working system came in the way of joining, you know, my sort of innovation as a designer with the world's largest seed bank specializing in corn seeds and the community. So basically, with the help of the seed bank, we managed to reintroduce a lot of these corns that were lost in the 90s following the NAFTA era. And the way the project works is that we create a new source of revenue with the husks to incentivize the farmers to plant again these varieties that are maybe not as productive as the industrial varieties if you're just looking to produce like tons and tons of grain, but that are super important for biodiversity, for culture, and for their own sort of healthy production of food. And I think it's also giving local women a source of flexible employment, reverting migration patterns for the next generation. And I think it's very, very important to work with women because it is women that are going to be the educators of the next generation. So a lot of the ideas that we're coming up together communally are being transferred into children that will hopefully become adults that will live a very different reality to their parents in a few years. So the results of the project so far has been the reintroduction of 8 species of native maize that were lost. We partner with the CIMMYT, the world's largest maize seed bank, and we've created communal composting centers to create new compost to help with the reintroduction of these seeds. And yes, we create flexible employment, and I mean flexible, which is a very important thing because the idea is to not fall into creating a factory. This is a way of allowing them to still have all of their traditions and their traditional way of living, and just coming to get employed whenever they need that extra sort of boost of income. And I think for me, it's been really rewarding to see how design can create value. 1 square meter of the material basically generates for a family the equivalent of maybe 1.5 tons, which could signify almost their whole harvest by using only a few cups. So the added value is just massive. And this is really interesting when you create parallel economies that didn't exist there before. And I think this is something that has also been a very sort of steep learning curve for myself, because really what we're doing is creating a new craft. We're not approaching a community that already had a craft, which is very common in Mexico for designers. They go to the community of the artisans that have woven for centuries, and they give them a different drawing. We're starting from nothing. We're starting from a new material and a new craft that I've created and that I've shared with the community, and hopefully one day we'll have a new generation of craftspeople. But a lot of the design work has been to create all the tools, all the processes, and all the methodologies so that anyone in the community can become a craftsperson in this new technique and put out, consistently good results with quality. And I think, when I was in university in St. Martin's, it was always this idea of design thinking. But for me, design thinking was always urban design thinking. And I think, when I started to do this thing of rural design thinking, all of these other things started to happen. And I think for rural design thinking, you have to situate yourself with the communities. You can't do it from the safety of your computer. So, I've been personally involved in every planting and harvesting period for the last 10 years. And I think when you're there, you start to realize that there's a lot of innovations that can happen. So, for example, that's a little sort of bench thing that we did with a circular blade where it allows us to cut really precisely to separate the leaves. This was like a major improvement in our processes, and it's something that I just came up with because I was there and I was getting really frustrated at how long it was taking, to cut the little leaves out. So I think the project also is encouraging families to be involved in every step of the production change, to provide hope for returning migrants so they can see a future in their community and traditions. This is a project about migrants, but it's a project about returning migrants that have been deported, migrants that are coming through a very sort of traumatic process of being sent back to Mexico. So it's a whole different set of challenges. So why does Totomoxtle matter? Why should you in Iceland be concerned about what happens to this little indigenous village? And I think it should really concern you, because in the last century, we've lost about 90% of all the diversity of agricultural produce that we've created over the last 10,000 years, in just 100 years. You know, when you walk into a supermarket and you see what seems like total abundance, really what you're looking at is a desert of biodiversity. You have maybe one or two options, whereas 100 years ago we had, you know, hundreds of options of every sort of food stock. I'm going to jump into my next project, which is Agave, which I call the magical plant. And this is a short video of how I work with it.
I really like working with agave. It's such a fantastic plant. Nowadays, it's mostly used to make tequila, and their leaves are just thrown away, which is a shame because you can make fibers from them. It's actually quite simple. You just have to beat them and scrape the leaves. When the fibers are washed and dried, they turn to a lovely blonde color. These fibers are called sisal, and for centuries they were considered the best material for making ropes and fishing nets. But unfortunately, the invention of plastics put most sisal growers out of business. It's hard to find raw sisal nowadays. I personally like to leave the fibers loose. They really feel like hair. I actually sometimes like to call it vegan horsehair.
So these are some of the pieces that I've done. This is called the dog bench. And you know, a lot of my design process has to do with first understanding the material and how it wants to behave, and then come up with the sort of aesthetic solutions for it. You've never seen a square horse or a square dog, you know, so you know the shapes have to follow the behavior of this hair. I've also dyed it, and the dyes I try to do with natural dyes as much as possible. So for example, I use a lot of pinks because they all come from cochineal, which is an insect that grows in the prickly pear cactus. Another wonderful indigenous invention of domesticating an insect to create a pigment. I could speak for hours about cochineal, but you know, we don't have enough time for that. So yeah, these are, for example, closets. This is a bar I did recently, bar cabinet. But I still, you know, even though it looks very handmade, I still work like a designer. I still go to Rhino on the computer, and you know, I do my designs. And we have a CNC machine in the workshop, and you know, we do all the work with as much digital fabrication as possible. But then it has this whole sort of second layer of immense handwork, where every single little hair is like tied by hand over and over and over. So yeah, very labor-intensive processes. But agaves are fulfilling the other big issue with Totomoxtle, which is about regenerating these fields where stones are growing instead of trees. So just as a reminder, this is what they look like during the dry season, these fields.
The switch to this foreign system had devastating consequences in the village. The weed killers were the worst, as they eradicated most of the wild shrubs. This caused a vicious cycle of erosion, which turned once fertile fields into desolate deserts. The topsoil has been washed away, leaving only rocks behind. Nothing grows here anymore. This is a digital representation of these mountains using topographic satellite data that helps us visualize the flow of water down the hillsides. Without wild plants retaining the soil with the roots, there is no stopping the water during the monsoon season. Our solution is to look back to indigenous terracing agriculture, to create physical barriers to slow the water. This is where agaves come into play, as they are the only local plant that can withstand the heat and poor soil quality of the area. By digging a trench and planting an agave by its side, we can achieve water and soil retention. Since 2015, we have been digging hundreds of trenches, and we have planted thousands of agaves of different varieties. 45,000 to be precise. The idea here is to plant the agaves along the trenches, which are spaced out every 50 meters and are leveled. This turns the trenches into small pools that filter the water through the bedrock, replenishing the water table and the wells needed for farming. The long-term goal is to retain enough soil and water to allow for the wild plants to come back. It might seem strange to call this, but what we are doing is actually reforestation. It's all about finding local solutions to regenerate the land. But in order to see the scale of this project, you have to take to the sky. This viewpoint really shows the magnitude of our efforts. It's a beautiful thing to see those green lines we created, crisscrossing the mountains, and of course to see the beginnings of new growth.
So yeah, I think, you know, what's really amazing is that we've managed to kind of harness that power of the community where you can gather, you know, tens of people, you know, almost 100 people at a time to form this reforestation brigades to go and plant agaves. And, you know, we plant close to 50,000, but these are the agaves that we planted. After a few years, they start to multiply and they start to, you know, a single agave can produce hundreds, if not thousands of babies. So it's really exponential, and it's really nice to see how, you know, men can be so super destructive to nature, but it can also be super empowering if done correctly. It can have the opposite effect. It can have a re-healing effect that will be way, way faster than what nature could by itself. So these are some images of these fields after a few years. You know, this is probably after 3 years. And if you can see, you know, along almost every hole, you have a new tree growing. And none of these trees have been planted. These are just, you know, seeds that come with the birds, with the wind. So it's a very sort of low-cost, high-impact solution. And these are some of the images of these pools, you know, in action once they start to retain water. And as you can see, they become almost planters. You know, these holes become the planters for new trees. So I'm going to jump into my last project, and I'll try to fit it in 10 minutes. But so this is my most recent project, talking about avocados. Another super famous staple of Mexico, another fruit domesticated by our indigenous communities, another fruit that has had a huge transformation over the centuries, and probably it's more radical from, you know, the sacred plant for the Aztecs to what we know as the Hass avocado. The Hass avocado is the most traded avocado in the world. It's a variety that was started by Rudolf Hass, that gentleman in the black and white picture, who was a horticulturalist in California that basically created from a single tree all of the Hass avocados of the world. So they are all clones of that one tree. And that has come to dominate the world trade of avocados. Another massive effect of NAFTA as well. Before NAFTA, there wasn't a single avocado being exported from Mexico because of fears that a plague would spread to the United States and Europe. That all of a sudden, with the signing of the Free Treaty, was magically abolished, and then hundreds of thousands of avocados get traded per day. And now, the state of Michoacán, which is the only state that is allowed, because of the Free Treaty Agreement, to export, produces 9 out of 10 avocados consumed in the US, but also the vast majority of the avocados consumed globally. A lot of the avocados that you eat here in Iceland are from Mexico and from Michoacán. And I think for me it was really, really interesting to see how this market was created by supply. There was no demand for avocados. It was a massive marketing effort in the early 2000s where the producers of avocado of Michoacán, which are the avocados from Mexico, almost went bankrupt, booking in the biggest ads during the Super Bowl in the early 2000s to create this sort of new tradition of eating guacamole on Super Bowl Sunday. And that really opened the floodgates to the trade of avocado between the two countries. This is a short clip of one of the biggest packing plants in Uruapan, Michoacán. I don't know how I got access to this, but you know, we managed to get access to this plant. And these are all clips from a documentary that I produced for this video. But it shows a little bit of the excess.
No hay otro negocio ni la droga que te dé esa utilidad tan fuerte, donde inviertes 10 y ganas 100 Es impresionante y con muy poco trabajo. Y desde ahí se empezó a nombrar como el oro verde, porque pues era encontrar una mina, pues nomás llegas a sacar.
So, Michoacán, besides being the place of the green gold, is also one of the most important biodiverse states in Mexico. And possibly the most iconic thing that happens in Michoacán is the migration of the monarch butterfly, the North American monarch butterfly, which is the biggest pollinator of North America. It travels all the way from the north of Canada and the United States all the way down to Mexico, and they all funnel into this one forest. No one really knows how they found that forest every single year and how they managed to arrive to the same place every year, but also on the 1st of November, which coincides with the Day of the Dead in Mexico, every single year. It's an amazing, amazing experience, a whole forest covered in butterflies. I'm not religious, but I think it's the closest thing to a spiritual sort of moment I've had in my life, being in this forest. But it's also a forest which is in peril. 44% of this UNESCO World Heritage Site has been cut down and was cut down between 94 from the signing of NAFTA to 2000. And also what you've seen is, a very, very close correlation between a decline in the North American monarch and the uptick in avocado world consumption as the years go by. So this is probably a recounting of one of the most dramatic events that happened during the conflict with the monarchs. This is José Luis Álvarez, a silviculturist, explaining what happened. A silviculturist is someone that creates forests.
En el 2002, por la tala clandestina irracional, lo que sucedió es lo siguiente: donde inverna la mariposa monarca, tiene que ser un bosque cerrado, así. ¿Okay? Lo que pasó aquí es que como talaron, se abrió el bosque. ¿Ves estos huecos entre mis dedos? Entonces, cuando comenzó a nevar y helar, pues naturalmente, como no era el bosque cerrado, entró la nieve, entró el hielo y congeló a las mariposas, ¿verdad? Fueron millones de mariposas que murieron, ¿no? Hay una fotografía donde estoy hasta las rodillas en mariposas, ¿no? Hasta la semana o 2 semanas ya olía horrible, ¿no? La putrefacción de que se estaban descomponiendo las mariposas, ¿no? Proteger la naturaleza tiene un peligro, ¿verdad? Pero si existe este peligro es porque existe una cantidad fabulosa de dinero que se puede ganar. Pues un ambientalista, que sea en México, que sea en África, que sea donde sea, siempre va a tener el peligro de una confrontación con gente muy, muy poderosa.
So I have been documenting the arrival of the monarchs for ages, for many, many years. My grandmother was from this region, so I have been going every time I was visiting my grandma to the sanctuary. And in one of those trips, I had the privilege of knowing this man, Homero Gómez González, who was the director of the Monarch Sanctuary. Homero was not only a very fierce activist, but also a local politician that really managed to turn his whole community into protectors of this forest and to see a future not in logging and not in avocado production, but more in ecotourism. But unfortunately, to be in the way between people that want to get access to the resources of a forest and the forest, you run a really big risk. And it's a risk that Homero unfortunately paid in 2020 when he was murdered. And I think for me, when I was starting this project through a series of interviews that I was doing with him, learning of his death really kind of changed the whole viewpoint of talking about the project, to really talk about how in Latin America, and especially in Mexico, I think the biggest threat to the environment is not really plastic waste, or if we're consuming too much of that, or a carbon footprint, or things like that. It's really the forceful taking of resources with violence. Mexico is the most dangerous country in the world to be an environmental activist. But this violence is obviously fueled by capital from our international trade partners. So this project took me to see the other case of Cheran, which is a community where all of their forests were cut down, and the resolution came through a revolution that was mounted by this woman, Josefina, and a group of women, but it's best if you hear it directly from her.
Secuestraban gente, la amarraban, la asustaban, tumbaban el pino, se lo llevaban y nosotros éramos libres de traer un leño, porque iban quemando ya después. Y mucha gente pues asustada. Es el bosque. Al rato van a ser las mujeres. Tenían miedo, por eso el señor cura decía que ya no había hombres, que aquí ya no había hombres en la comunidad, y si era cierto. ¿Por qué? Porque no querían enfrentarse. Le hablamos al ejército de Zamora, al ejército de Morelia, y nadie quiso apoyarnos. No podíamos hablar. No era justo pues ya lo que nos estaban haciendo, y por eso decidimos levantarnos. Yo lo que hice unos papelitos. Nada más se me vino a mi mente, ya basta, compañero, es hora de levantarnos. 5:30 de la mañana cuando empezaron a tocar las campanas. Los cohetes, era un aviso. Palos, piedras, era lo que traíamos nomás. Un carro lo detuvimos a las 8:30 de la mañana. Ese fue el primero. Andaba sobre el hombre ese. Lo bajamos y según lo amarramos, pues no teníamos ni lazos, no estábamos pues ni prevenidos, nada. Lo amarramos con el rebozo, el primero en la puerta del templo. Fueron 5 los que detuvimos. Ya después empezaron a quemar los carros. No nos importó pasara lo que pasara o que nos pasara a nosotros como mujeres, ¿no? No le tuvimos miedo. Gracias a Dios a los compañeros, no sé cómo lo hicieron. En las barricadas se movieron, hicieron, deshicieron, pero la comunidad estaba al pendiente. Pues nunca se me va a olvidar.
So I think, you know, obviously to hear the story of this group of women to take control of their town was amazing, and a true testament of how, you know, community unity can be super, super powerful against adversity. I think what's really amazing about Cheran is that they've managed to reforest about 80% of everything that was cut down in less than a decade. They planted over 9 million trees, and now they're producing so many trees that they are now donating trees to other reforestation efforts around the area. But it's still a very tense region, you know. This is part of the community police that is armed and that is patrolling the area to ensure that no one cuts trees, but also that no one smuggles in avocado trees. So that's a sign which establishes that it's completely forbidden to have a single avocado within the boundaries of Cheran. And it's for a reason. This is an image of, you know, the Cheran reforestation on one side. These are all new trees that they planted. And on the other side, it's an avocado orchard, you know, just being plucked and starting to grow. So it's an oasis of forest around a sea of avocados. And so the result of this was the creation of this really long textile that was all dyed with avocado pits and skins. I'm gonna skip this because I think we're running out of time. But basically, it was a really, really long textile, 40 meters long by 3 meters high. We had to create our own tools to create such a long textile. But it basically tells a story of what happened with Cheran in graphic motion, inspired by a lot of Mexican muralism. And we also created this sort of new material with the skins of the avocado, a new marquetry material that we've been using to create cabinets and other furniture, building up on what we've learned with the corn veneer. But it's a whole different technique, and it's a lot more labor intensive. But it's really, really special. It's almost like between leather and steel, very, very nice material. And lastly, you know, I created also this sort of boro, which is inspired by Japanese kind of repair techniques. So we created this piece with all the offcuts of the textile. and maybe hinting at the possibility of repairing the broken system of the avocado trade. This is a piece in honor of Homero. So whenever I give this talk, I get asked, well, what should we do? I mean, should we start eating differently, stop eating this, stop eating that? And it's a very hard answer to give you, but I think, it makes me think of something I learned when I was learning about the Aztecs in school. They say that Hernán Cortés, the conquistador from Spain, was blown away by the lavish banquets that Moctezuma, the last Aztec emperor, had in his courts. He was getting, fresh fish delivered by a series of running messengers all the way from the Gulf of Mexico, fruits from the jungles of the south. You get the picture, very exotic nourishments from all over the country delivered to him because he was the emperor. And if we really think about it today, the average person in the developed world probably has a more complete diet than Moctezuma, the Aztec emperor. We're just simply eating too much and from too far away. So my conclusions is, I think indigenous communities must be included in sustainability policy-making decisions because they are the least responsible for the climate crisis, but the first ones to suffer from it. They are victims of the negative effects of globalization while being excluded from its advantages. And I think for me, well, this is a short clip of how I got invited to the World Economic Forum, and basically I took Delfino with me and kind of took a step back and let Delfino take the lead on talking about the challenge that he faces as an indigenous person in the 21st century. For me, the goal is not sustainability, but regeneration. I think we should not be content with sustaining the current state of our resources, but creating more resources and leaving this place in a better state that we found it in. The climate crisis cannot be solved without addressing the inequality crisis. We are not going to get past this if the only way for a poor person to get basic human rights is to go and cut down the forest behind his house. And I think we can't do this without dealing with the colonial ghosts of our past. And I think designers can play a major role in creating new production systems that are fair, collaborative, and not extractive. And I think, we have to remember that the environmental crisis is a man-made crisis. There's this whole new idea of, abandoning this human-centered design philosophy for design. And I don't think we should do that because it's not about thinking about nature. It's about thinking about the problems that we created as humans for humans, and nature is in between. So I think we should just diversify the kind of humans that we are designing for. Design must engage in these difficult conversations to make sense of the complexities of the irreversibly interconnected world we live in. So I'll leave you with a very short clip of a video that I did with voiceovers that Homero did when he was inviting tourists to visit the sanctuary. This is his voice overlapped with images that I took there, and I'll leave you with these passing thoughts, the last words of Homero a few weeks before he was killed.
Está viviendo una gran locura de la mariposa monarca, donde millones vuelan y vuelan por todos lados, en el cielo. Mira qué hermoso, algo maravilloso. Aquí es donde duermen las viajeras, las polinizadoras. Hoy vuela y vuela por todos los senderos, buscando agua. Mira, más que bendición, buscando agua, buscando flores. Aquí en el Santuario del Rosario, el más grande y hermoso del mundo. Hoy se viste de naranja el cielo.
Thank you.
Should we take a seat?
Yes.
Hi, everybody. We have a few minutes to discuss a little bit further, and thank you so much for giving your talk.
Thank you.
I think we've all learned a lot. I will not look at avocado in the same way after this. So I wanted to ask you about your connection with nature and the land. Where does that come from? Were you raised that way? You seem to go back to that. That probably is your source in a way.
Yeah, I mean, I think it comes partly from my father, who's a baker, and I think, you know, if you're into cooking and baking, you have to be super interested in the source of ingredients, and if you're interested in source of ingredients, you're interested in agriculture and therefore nature. But I think also, I mean, I see some similarities between Mexico and Iceland, even though very different landscapes, but I think they are both places where you can't ignore nature. Nature is ever present. Yep. Mexico is also a very seismic, very volcanic, very, you know, hurricane-prone place. No matter how much you want to plan, nature always has the upper hand. So I think, you know, this is I think Mexican design is always very rooted in that raw materiality because of the proximity to nature. It's hard not to be influenced by it.
With your way of designing and how you make your products and methods, it's always about the community and people and taking care of everything as a whole. How does that? Because we live in a fast capitalism society where everything has to be like, at least that's my experience. How does your thinking match with the world of fast fashion and all that? Is your message getting through?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think the thing is, something that I've learned is actually, I've had to let go of a lot of things that I learned in design school, where it was almost too conceptual sometimes, you know, and so it stayed within the sort of like speculative world of design, you know, and I think in a place like Mexico, you do need action. It's just so urgent. So I think if you want to implement these things, you cannot ignore the financial side of things. So what I try to do is to have some sort of marriage between capitalism, because it's what started the issues. You have to find solutions within capitalism. And I think, unfortunately, nowadays, you can't think of sustainability in a project without also thinking about economic sustainability for it. For example, the reforestation project with agaves, you know, we have it all calculated down to the cost of planting a single agave, you know, because you have to budget for that. And I think my work, you know, has this dichotomy of, on the one side is done in collaboration and produced by some of the poorest people in the world, and then being sold to some of the richest in the world. So I think there's also this kind of almost Robin Hoodian effect going on as well. But you have to work within the bounds of capitalism. You can't escape it. But I think at the end, what I try to do is to, have that balance between innovation and tradition, capitalism and you know, community activism.
You talk about that you were taught to design trash in your designing school. Do you mean it in the way that things have to be like, you have to get the people to buy new stuff every year? Has that changed? Do you feel a change in the world, how we think about these things?
Yeah, I mean, I studied I was studying in 2007, from 2007 to 2008. It was kind of like the dawn of smart products, you know. I mean, I remember when I started studying, I'm going to sound really old, but like, you know, there wasn't an iPhone around. So it was really product design with a big focus on mass electronic goods, packaging, a lot of plastic, a lot of unrepairable products, a lot of products that would be on the shelves for a very short time. And I think, yeah, it was designing trash. I think in general it has changed, but I think sustainability is still a box that gets ticked all the way from university to corporate environments. And I think it has to start with education. I think it needs to be so much more of a whole encompassing attitude. And I think it's also a conversation that, at least in the developed countries, has been totally dominated by the plastic problem.
Yeah.
Because the plastic problem is the easiest to tackle and the quickest to produce a new shiny solution of an alternative product that gets sold back to you. So I just see it as another cog within the machinery of marketing. And I think things like, you know, regeneration, erosion, indigenous rights are much more important, but a lot harder to talk about and especially to sell. So it's about really maybe design institutions and young designers. I think that you should all be pushing the dial to change these conversations to look beyond the plastic problem, because it's way more complex than that.
Yeah. So you seem to work a lot. You're interested in many things. You're also an activist, almost a politician. You have a strong message with your products. What do you do when you're not working? I mean, do you have a hobby, or how are you as a person, not the working designer?
Well, you know, I don't see my job as a job. It's my hobby. So it's hard to make a distinction.
So the answer is no, you don't have a hobby.
I don't know, you know. I mean, I spend so much time in nature and so much time. The research very often doesn't happen because I'm like, okay, today I'm working and I'm going to go research this and that. I love just meeting people. Maybe that's my hobby. My hobby is just to have conversations with people that are very different to me. And I think this is something that I would encourage everyone to look for, you know. I think we get comfortable within our environments and talking with people that have had similar life experiences to us. And it's wonderful when you can get out of that and you can go and talk to people that are so radically different to you and to learn from them. For me, it's maybe not only a hobby, but a bit of an addiction, but a positive one.
That's very lucky for us, because we have a coffee break in a bit. You can talk to all these great people that are here. Wonderful. But before we finish here off, do you feel, do you know what the next design item by Fernando Laposse will be? And do you feel pressure to bring something like really cool, you know, project next? Nothing that I can talk about, because I think another thing is I mean, I'll use this opportunity to talk about this. I get asked this a lot, you know, by journalists especially, or by museums, you know, like, what's the next thing? What's the new thing that you're developing? You know, you've already shown corn, you've already shown this. And my projects take, in average, maybe a decade to really come into fruition, you know. So when I was saying, okay, the Avocado project is my latest project, you know, I've been working on that since 2019. But it's just, I think if you want to do things right, you need to leave them the time to really mature. And I think a lot of these projects I see as lifelong projects. So the new things are maybe developments within what we're doing. What I can talk about is, for example, right now we are in talks with one of the largest prisons in Michoacán. Okay. They have a social program where you can offer employment to inmates that are about to be released to make, you know, savings for their eventual reintroduction into society. So we're moving the production of the avocado market tree with a group of inmates, and you know, it will be a very interesting new progression, because it's a project about violence, and it's about maybe helping and giving a fresh start to people that were involved in violence and that want a second chance. Yeah.
So these are the kind of developments that are always happening, but no, I don't have a next big project, and I'm not even planning on looking for one. If it comes to me, it will come to me, but so far I'm focusing on these other three.
Maybe it can be in connection with Iceland in some way.
Maybe.
There are a lot of designers in the room, so they can approach you in the coffee break we are having now, and please, people, give it up for Fernando Laposse. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, that was great.
Þetta taka upp. Okkar taktur, okkar kraftur, okkar stöndum á fætur aftur. Okkar sigur, okkar stíll, okkar saga, okkar fag. Okkar stund, okkar staður, okkar dagur nótt. Okkar nætur bjartar, okkar hlýtt í hjarta, okkar magnaða vinátta, okkar vonbrigða árátta, okkar litríka gleði, okkar baráttu gen, okkar náttúra stygg, okkar íslenska bygg, okkar bjartsýnis kór, okkar gull, okkar bjór.
Þannig að spurningin hvernig gerum við grænmeti og ávexti meira spennandi fyrir börn?
Ástæðan okkur byrjaði í fatahönnun var til að gera flíkur á sjálfa mig. Svo geðvægt að geta hannað fötin sín og bara haft nákvæmlega eins og maður vill allt sé.
My inspiration comes from around, mostly when I'm walking or reading, listening to music, even scrolling social media.
Fyrst byrjaði ég alltaf á því að ímynda mér útlínu formsins á þeirri flík sem ég langar að búa til. Það sem einkennir mína hönnun þessi einföldu form og þessar kunnulegu arketýpur.
Oft eyði ég bara mest megninu af ferlinu í að velja rétta þræði og einhvern veginn að blanda þeim saman og gera alls konar pröfur. Við þurfum að búa til tilfinningaleg tengsl við flíkurnar okkar.
Framtíð íslenska fatahönnunar mjög björt, myndi ég segja.
Það sem ég sé fyrir mér í framtíðinni að sameina hátækni, handverk og hönnun.
Hjá Fléttu erum við alltaf að vinna með annarkvort gamlar vörur eða gömul hráefni sem annars hefðu verið send erlendis til endurvinnslu eða jafnvel til urðunar og erum að hanna úr þeim nýjar vörur. Mér finnst eiginlega ekki hægt að gera sjálfbæra hönnun nema að fylgja hráefninu sem maður að vinna með. Að elta það og sjá hvað það vill verða. Af því að þegar maður byrjar á efniviðnum þá það skorðirnar sem maður hefur. Pæla í hvernig við festum það saman og það sé hægt að taka í sundur að að líftíma loknum, hvað verður það næst? Að svona hugsa þetta í hringrás. Textíll er náttúrulega gríðarlega stórt umhverfisvandamál. Það er einkennisfatnaður hjá mörgum fyrirtækjum og maður einhvern veginn gerir sér ekki grein fyrir því fyrr en maður sér það hversu mikið magn þetta er. Og það að ákveða að varpa ljós á það og sýna það finnst mér skipta mjög miklu máli. 2024 þá gerðum við töskur úr höttum, slæðum og bindum og erum núna að taka fyrir jakka, pils, kjóla og að búa til púða. Það sem okkur langaði svolítið að gera með þessum púðum er að lyfta einkennum einkennisfatnaðarins upp. Og það gerir það líka verkum að við þurfum ekki að bæta neinu við nema við notum nýjan þráði að sauma þá saman. Á þessum púða þá er þetta hérna rennilás af kjól sem er nýttur hérna á bakhliðinni og svo er hérna annar sem er jakki og nappalistin er nýttur. Við erum svona að reyna að fara auðvitað alltaf eins vel og við getum með þetta hráefni af því þetta er svo fínt. Þetta er búið að vera rosa skemmtilegt ferli. Það er eiginlega erfitt að hætta af því að það er svo margt sem mann langar til að gera og í raun og veru er endalaust tækifæri að vinna með þennan efnivið. Ég hlakka bara til áframhaldandi samstarfs. Það er svo gaman að vinna með þennan efnivið.
taka upp. Okkar taktur, okkar kraftur, okkar stöndum á fætur aftur. Okkar sigur, okkar stíll, okkar saga, okkar fag. Okkar stund, okkar staður, okkar dagur nótt. Okkar nætur bjartar, okkar hlýtt í hjarta. Okkar magnaða vinátta, okkar vonbrigða árátta. Okkar litríka gleði, okkar baráttu gen. Okkar náttúra stygg, okkar íslenska bygg. Okkar bjartsýnis kór, okkar gull, okkar bjór.
Þannig að spurningin hvernig gerum við grænmeti og ávexti meira spennandi fyrir börn?
Ástæðan okkur byrjaði í fatahönnun var til að gera flíkur á sjálfa mig. Svo geðvægt að geta hannað fötin sín og bara haft nákvæmlega eins og maður vill allt sé.
My inspiration comes from around, mostly when I'm walking or reading, listening to music, even scrolling social media.
Fyrst byrjaði ég alltaf á því að ímynda mér útlínu formsins á þeirri flík sem mig langar að búa til. Það sem einkennir mína hönnun eru þessi einföldu form og þessar kunnuglegu arketýpur.
Oft eyði ég bara mest megnina af ferlinu í að velja rétta þræði og einhvern veginn að blanda þeim saman og gera alls konar pröfur. Við þurfum að búa til tilfinningaleg tengsl við flíkurnar okkar.
Framtíð íslenska fatahönnunar mjög björt, myndi ég segja. Það sem ég sé fyrir mér í framtíðinni að sameina hátækni, handverk og hönnun.
Hjá Fléttu erum við alltaf að vinna með annarkvort gamlar vörur eða gömul hráefni sem annars hefði verið send erlendis til endurvinnslu eða jafnvel til urðunar og erum að hanna úr þeim nýjar vörur. Mér finnst eiginlega ekki hægt að gera sjálfbæra hönnun nema að fylgja hráefninu sem maður er að vinna með. Að elta það og sjá hvað það vill verða. Af því að þegar maður byrjar á efniviðnum þá eru það skorðirnar sem maður hefur. Pæla í hvernig við festum það saman og það sé hægt að taka í sundur að líftíma loknum. Hvað verður það næst? Að svona hugsa þetta í hringrás. Textíll er náttúrulega gríðarlega stórt umhverfisvandamál. Það er einkennisfatnaður hjá mörgum fyrirtækjum og maður einhvern veginn gerir sér ekki grein fyrir því fyrr en maður sér það hversu mikið magn þetta er. Og það að ákveða að varpa ljós á það og sýna það finnst mér skipta mjög miklu máli. 2024 þá gerðum við töskur úr höttum, slæðum og bindum og erum núna að taka fyrir jakka, pils, kjóla og að búa til púða. Það sem okkur langaði svolítið að gera með þessum púðum er að lyfta einkennum einkennisfatnaðarins upp. Og það gerir það líka verkum að við þurfum ekki að bæta neinu við nema við notum nýjan þráði að sauma þá saman. Á þessum púða þá er þetta hérna rennilás af kjól sem er nýttur hérna á bakhliðinni og svo er hérna annar sem er jakki sem og nappalistin er nýttur. Við erum svona að reyna að fara auðvitað alltaf eins vel og við getum með þetta hráefni af því þetta er svo fínt. Þetta er búið að vera rosa skemmtilegt ferli. Það er eiginlega erfitt að hætta af því að það er svo margt sem mann langar til að gera og í raun og veru er endalaust tækifæri að vinna með þennan efnivið. Ég hlakka bara til áframhaldandi samstarfs. Það er gaman að vinna með þennan efnivið.
Takk. Ok. Hæ, hæ. Halló allir frammi. Drífa sig inn. Okay. Welcome back. Were you a bit surprised that you got a coffee break? Because we don't, no, usually we don't give breaks, but of course, because we're on this journey, we also need pit stops. So we had this coffee break We go to lunch at 12. We're back at 3:15, and then we have a power break in the afternoon. Then we go for design drinks at the end. So it's a lot of, moments to mingle and have a serious conversation with each other, or oneself also, the source, feeding the source. Anyways, we are continuing under the same theme, of course, and this session is called The Future in the Past. I've been referring to it as a materially sensitive and culturally respectful journey to the source. We will have farmers market and Lina Ghotmeh, architect, speaking. So, give it up for farmers market.
Bergþóra and Jóel, farmers market. With strong ties to the vibrant Icelandic music and design scene, Farmers Market draws inspiration from Icelandic roots, combining classic Nordic design elements with chic modernity. Founded in 2005 by the artist couple, designer Bergþóra Guðnadóttir and musician Jóel Pálsson, the brand celebrates its 20th anniversary this year.
Hello, everyone. First of all, I want to thank DesignTalks for inviting us to share the story of our little baby, Farmers Market Iceland, which is a clothing brand we founded 20 years ago. Uppspretta, the source. That's the theme today, because every creative journey has an origin. And in our case, the journey is quite personal. We founded Farmers Market in 2005 with a simple idea: to create timeless clothing that reflects both Icelandic heritage and a modern way of living. But the true source of the brand goes far beyond fashion. It's a reflection of life itself. It's about how the past shapes the present, how music creates atmosphere, and how nature constantly reminds us of what really matters. In 2005, the atmosphere here was quite weird. As you can see, Iceland and some other countries was going through a period of extremely rapid economic boom. There was very easy access to loans and global investments, creating a wave of wealth and consumerism. And luxury goods became symbols of the era. And I asked AI to create an image to represent Iceland in 2005. And this is what came. I couldn't find anything better, so here it is. Well, Farmers Market was founded right in the middle of this atmosphere. After some time in this bubble, we felt a deep urge to create something sustainable and connect to our roots on a deeper level. Instead of chasing fast fashion and trends, we looked back to timeless values: craftsmanship, sustainability, and appreciation for what is already around us. By looking back, we can understand how something deeply personal can become universal, and how things we carry with us from childhood, from our surroundings, and from those who came before us can be transformed into something new. So let's start at the beginning with our roots and family. Iceland is a country shaped by contrasts between the rural and the urban, the old and the new. And so are we personally. For centuries, rural life defined Icelandic society, with small communities scattered around harsh but beautiful landscape. People lived close to nature, relying on sheep farming, fishing, and handcraft traditions like knitting and weaving. Daily life was shaped by resourcefulness, season, and deep respect for the land. And most Icelanders our age have a sheep-growing farmer in their family tree. In contrast, Reykjavík is a very young city. The capital is only a little more than 100 years old. Halldór Laxness, Iceland's Nobel Prize-winning author, was very good at portraying the inner struggles of Icelanders transitioning from rural life to Reykjavík. In his book, Independent People, he describes how this shift was not just a physical journey, but a deep emotional transformation, often marked by a sense of guilt and loss. This quiet tension between the rural past and the urban present still lingers in Icelandic culture and is one of the invisible threads running through farmers market philosophy. Because we don't see tradition and modern life as opposites, but rather as two forces that can exist side by side. It was actually my great-grandfather who became the first mayor of Reykjavík in 1908. The mayor was to live in a nice house in the suburbs of the city. This is the house Höfði, which is only a few hundred meters from here. So you can see how rapidly the city has grown for the past 100 years. Much later, there was a famous summit meeting held in this house between Ronald Reagan and Mikhail Gorbachev. And this was a key moment in the Cold War, but that's another story. My grandfather, on my mother's side, however, he was an agricultural farmer, and me and my cousins grew up working in his greenhouses. So you could say that I have roots in both the countryside and the city, and so does Bergþóra, but in a bit different way.
Yeah. Our origins are, of course, rooted in our DNA. Mine is a blend of Icelandic farmers and Danish restaurateurs. As Jóel mentioned, we drew inspiration from the lives of our grandparents and great-grandparents when developing the concept for our brand. My father was born on this farm belonging to his grandparents in southern Iceland. He had a happy and creative childhood where everything for the household was more or less made in-house. But it was also a tough, old-fashioned farm life where he shared one room with his parents and 4 siblings. However, my mother, she was born in Copenhagen, Denmark, where her grandparents owned this restaurant and lived above it in this charming brownstone building in the heart of the city. Though my great-grandparents were born around the same time, their lives were vastly different, something I find incredibly fascinating to reflect on. While my Danish great-grandfather would enjoy an elegant Danish lunch every day, complete with starched white napkins and silver cutlery, the other one did not have electricity or bathroom inside his house. I've always liked to mix and blend things together, and I am a fan of all types of fusion in fashion, food, and music. Maybe it has something to do with the mix in my DNA.
Music has always been a big part of the story of Farmers Market. It's a thread that runs through everything we do. In fact, the mother company of Farmers Market began as a record label for my own albums, and it still operates as one today. I grew up in a musical family and started playing at a young age. By the time I was 18, I was performing professionally, and I am still an active musician today. I actually found that having been a freelance musician for many years was a very good preparation for building a startup company, since it requires handling everything from brainstorming, composing, and producing to branding, distribution, and financial management. However, obviously, I do experience a lot of imposter syndrome in the fashion business, given that I come from a different industry. But I'm still here after 20 years, because it's actually such an interesting journey. I probably performed on this stage over 100 times. Just ask the technicians here. It's the first time I've been asked to speak. So, it's clear that music plays a huge role in our lives and is woven into everything we do. At our fashion shows, we always have live music, with my friends joining me on stage, and music plays a key role in our commercials, videos as well. Here's an example. A couple of years ago, we invited our friends Högni and Gummi not only to be the male models for Farmers Market commercial, but also to perform a beloved Icelandic song called Blessuð sértu sveitin mín, which translates as "Blessed be you, my countryside," or something like that. The three of us rearranged this old song in a sort of a quirky country style, and I'll share this short video with you now.
Fjalladrottning móðir mín, mér svo kær og hjartabundin, sæll ég býr við brjóstin þín, blessuð alna fóstra mín, hér á handinn óðöl sín, öll sem verð á jörðu bundin, að fjalladrottning móðir mín, mér svo kær og hjartabundin. Blessuð sértu sveitin mín, sumar, vetur, ár og daga, engir fjöllin áin þín, yndislega sveitin mín, heilla mig og heim til sín, huga minn úr fjarlæg draga, blessuð sértu sveitin mín, sumar, vetur, ár og daga.
It's nice to have so many talented friends. And family too. Actually, the video was shot by Bergþóra's brother, Óttar Guðnason.
Yeah, true. Growing up in Iceland has greatly influenced my sense of aesthetics. Nature and the ever-changing weather remain my primary muses, but also objects, clothing, and costumes, particularly from the neighboring northern nations. From the anoraks and handcrafted glass bead colors from the people of Greenland, Scandinavian Aran and Fair Isle knits, as well as traditional waxed outerwear from country clothing in England, and of course, Icelandic farmers and fishermen culture. When it comes to color, every shade I incorporate into our design is rooted in Icelandic landscape in some way. The palette I find most captivating is the one found around geothermal areas. Traveling through Iceland, hiking, camping, or skiing is where I get a lot of energy from, and it always leaves me creatively recharged. This was actually in COVID. It was fantastic. My background as a designer is rooted in textiles, and everything I create originates from the raw material. I never start by sketching a garment or a collection and then choose fabrics. It's always the other way around. I first choose material and then I decide what to use it for. One important source on my creative journey is knitting, a skill I learned from my grandmother at the age of 5. Since then, knitting has remained an essential part of my creative process. For our brand, we prioritize in natural or recycled materials, using synthetics only when necessary for added durability, water resistance, or occasional decorative detail. We started with a few styles made from Icelandic wool, but from the outset, our goal was to develop a complete collection featuring a full layering system. From underwear to outerwear and everything in between. This process took several years, as we chose to grow the company organically rather than overextending ourselves financially. Now let's go through the layers. Woolen underwear is obviously essential for life in Iceland. Typically, first layer wool garments look quite simple, but I wanted to add a touch of sensuality and country romance. Inspired by stories of hidden romantic moments in a barn or while camping. Outerwear is also a crucial layer for protection against the elements. Until now, we have relied on the original water-resistant fabric, oiled or waxed cotton. Additionally, we have paired it with high-quality faux fur made from Icelandic wool for added insulation. The layers in between consist of all other clothing worn for various occasions. Over time, we have built a substantial collection of sweaters, pants, dresses, and numerous accessories. For these pieces, we use a variety of fabrics, including wool, silk, mohair, alpaca, cotton, and linen. All the fabrics and yarns are custom-made and dyed exclusively for us, mainly in Italy, Portugal, and here in Iceland. But like many designers, I have a deep appreciation for beautiful objects, whether it's a garment, jewelry, shoes, textiles, or anything else. Sometimes I buy things with no practical use simply because I want to admire and touch them. Over time, some of these pieces become a source of inspiration for my work, either consciously or in ways I only realized later. One such piece is, in fact, the cape I'm wearing. Though I have never worn it until now, I have owned it for nearly 20 years. I found it at an antique dealer in Paris. It's a French embroidered silk cape dating back to around 1900. This cape has actually influenced my work in many ways, but the most direct inspiration can be seen in two particular designs that I want to share. The first is the Milpa wool cape, which I created in 2013. It is crafted from woven tweed made with Icelandic wool. While woven tweed from Icelandic wool was once common, by the time we explored this material, it had not been made on an industrial scale for at least 40 years. We collaborated with a factory that was willing to experiment with us, but our wool is quite rough, so it took a while before we got the finish we wanted. Another creation influenced by the same historical cape is our waxed cotton cape. But here we also see influences from Inuits and fishermen anoraks. So from a mix of inspirations, these modern adaptations emerged, designed to provide protection against our cold wind and rain. Hand fans are another example of objects that have inspired me. They are both highly functional and beautifully elegant. I had a photo of this one pinned to my mood board in my studio for years before finally incorporating its influence into one of my knitting patterns. Pretty obvious when you see it like that. Other patterns of mine come from different sources. One is a leopard pattern that I made 15 years ago. I know it does not strike you as something Nordic, but it is made with Icelandic wool. I was working at the time with an Icelandic knitting factory that mainly produced knits with Nordic patterns. And I wanted to use Icelandic wool, but with a complete different look. And this one actually became quite successful. Ever since, this pattern has been a part of our collection in different garments and in different materials. Yet another pattern that I developed and we call ból was inspired by old traditional patterns for textiles found in Iceland, in the so-called sjónabækur. I don't know what you call them in English. I have developed it for weaving, as we can see here in a blanket, and also in our towels. And then I also developed it for print and knit, as in this silk scarf and the woolen socks. To finish my talk about the source, I have, as you probably noticed, mentioned a few styles from our collection, including the Myrká cape, Syðri Reykir sweater, and Barðastaðarinn ból. If you're wondering about those strange names, the reason is that every item in our collection is named after an Icelandic farm.
At the end of the day, farmers market is not just about clothing. It's about stories, connections, and the things that shape us. And while inspiration may come from nature, music, and the past, the real magic happens because of the incredible people who bring it all to life. Our dedicated team working with us in marketing and photo shoots, and sales and logistics, our staff. They are the ones that connect with our customers, share our passion, and make sure our vision reaches the world. So to them and to all of you, takk fyrir okkur.
Takk fyrir.
Lina Ghotmeh, architect. Leading her practice in Paris, Lina Ghotmeh's designs echo her lived experience in Beirut, a palimpsest of unrest. Orchestrated as an archaeology of the future, every project emerges materially sensitive and in symbiosis with nature. With a portfolio including some of the most forward-thinking works of our times, this awarded architect has held numerous professorships and is on Dezeen's list of 50 most powerful women in architecture and design.
Hello everyone. Thank you so much for having me here for this design talk. It's a true pleasure to be part of this talk, and especially in Iceland, a place that I've been really dreaming to visit. Unfortunately, I had just one day, but hopefully I'll come back to visit this fantastic place. And it's really great to be welcomed by the volcano eruption, so really good energy. So talking about conventions and how we can design actually through rethinking conventions is something that we've been really carrying on with my practice. And of course, always when we're thinking conventions, I think we're thinking about how we inhabit Earth and how can we think about other ways, more sustainable ways to inhabit that ground that we all share together. And this is something that we constantly are thinking of with my atelier and with my team. Personally, I grew up in Beirut, so Beirut is a bit of the opposite end from Iceland. We are here in a Mediterranean climate. We're also in a place that has been living constant mishaps. So we see here this photo by Joe Keserwani, a Lebanese photographer who took Beirut under, with this kind of mass of concrete that invades the sea. And it always reminds us of us humans, how we inhabit this planet and this kind of constant construction and concrete that is present. But something also very particular about Beirut is the fact that it was inhabited by so many different civilizations. So throughout history, we have seen Romans, we have seen the Greeks, we have seen Ottomans, we have seen really many civilizations coming and occupying that ground. And it reminds us how diverse we are. And also it sees its own traces in the ground itself, because every time there's an archaeology, we can see all those histories revealing, and reminds us also of the power of nature that really comes in and pops out with all those interstitial presences. And I've been really very inspired by archaeology, because archaeology is this process constantly of digging to find traces of what existed already. It's somehow always coming closer to real history, but it's always subjective because it's dependent on those different objects that one finds and then compose with them a certain reality. And I see architecture in the same way. It's about digging, it's about finding stories and traces and really composing them to become a new story. And with the advent of the Anthropocene, I think we are even beyond that today. With the impact of humans on Earth, we see that we are really needing more ground even to sustain us. But also scientists are very great actually to remind us that we are nature, so we are more composed of microbes than we are of human cells. So that really brings a different perspective on the way we should inhabit Earth or the way we should construct our surrounding. And that's where we're constantly questioning how much nature in architecture. And in that sense, scenes that one sees in Beirut are ones that question, the limit between what is built and what is inhabited by nature. So when I'm designing with my atelier in Paris, we're always thinking and looking at history and looking at how we built before and how can architecture become an act of emergence and of digging. So somehow looking at, for example, this photo of the obelisk that was found in Egypt, I really love this photo because it shows you how architecture can be fashioned by its context, even by the material of its own context. And thinking also of architecture as this evolutionary process that is never linear, that really connects multiple stories together, that multiple disciplines as well. So when we're thinking about what we're doing, we're thinking that architecture is situated somehow like this kind of space and time suspension where we're between the past, between archaeology, the act of digging, of looking at stories and histories, but also it kind of connects to the human. So it is about humanity, it's about inclusiveness, diversity, and it is about nature in the sense that it should be inclusive of that environment, but also that emanates beauty. And beauty is that sense of emotion that really links us to one another and links us to what we don't see necessarily in what connects us. And in a way also projecting into the future, because every act of building is kind of an emergence of something original that is new, that has a sense of newness and extraordinary to it. So the process of making in my atelier is never linear. It's something, it somehow moves from different mediums, from looking at stories, at histories, to producing images, to making models with the hand, to conversations, to really discussing always and always connected to that sensitive realm that the hand implies. And that is something that is present in multiple scales of making. So either through objects, like here, for example, this kind of coat hanger that is under a bar, that is made of earth, that we have made for a restaurant in Palais Tokyo, or even like always bringing artisanal works within the scale of architecture by looking at textures, at materiality. And this is also a way also to connect with nature, because nature is always about texture, about these kind of multiple layers that exist around us. So we move with this kind of materiality and this relationship to light and to space from interiors, from making a chair, but also with experimenting with materials and bringing them into scale of architecture, like, for example, this glass making. So somehow, in a way, I love also looking at architecture as a way of cooking, as making things with ingredients that become part of a space. And here, this glass that is melted becomes part of a shop for chocolate. And then also the chocolate maker is also a sculptor. He sculpts like those huge penguins of chocolate. He told me I can't eat them, but that's a pity. And then we move from this to really like sketching, and actually those are different sketches that led to that same shop, models, and like this world that constitutes every project. And here we see this panel of thought that constituted the ideas behind the Serpentine Pavilion in London. So we see this pavilion really is emerging from those different memories or these different collages that really refers to histories and become, in a way, a space. And in that sense, this pavilion set up in a garden, in Kensington Garden, was really talking about also leaves, about the garden, the structure of what trees or leaves of the trees are, is about questioning what is a pavilion. And in that sense, we went back to Mali, and we were interested in those Dogon people who build those pavilions that have a lot of meaning, because they are places where all the elderly of the village, they meet and they sit under this heavy roof, and they have to stay seated until they find their own solution for important matters. And what is very interesting is that when they are in this kind of low space, they are invited to non-violent discourse, because as soon as they get angry or stand up, they just bump their heads, so they cannot. So I thought this is really a great place to, or like idea maybe for an assembly. And I tried to lower the ceiling as much as I could. It wasn't possible with the like regulation of Kensington Royal Palace and all this, but in a way it's kind of a horizontal space that invites kind of togetherness, and it's also looking at other forms, like what is a pavilion historically in in England, and looking at Stonehenge as a form of a pavilion that still today we don't know why it was really constructed for, but still it was a place where like people would manifest and talk and like express this link to the universe in a way. And also looking at these, celebratory moments and allowing the pavilion to be this place of togetherness, and somehow like this table that is inside the pavilion is a place where everybody meets and is invited to link to what we're gathered for around the table, and sometimes we're gathered around food. And food for me is very important. I'm Mediterranean. Everyone who meets me, like being Beirut born, will say, I love hummus. I say I don't eat hummus all the time, but it's kind of also this relationship with food that roots us, but also talks about sustainability, because when it's kind of the relationship to what we eat is also about rootedness, about also the way, like if it's eaten more sustainably. So really linking to those notions of how to build a more sustainable relationship to Earth. So in a way, this architecture becomes multi-layered. It talks about more literally forms of structures, like we see here the structure of a palm leaf, and learns from that to become an architecture that is simply made of those like beams that are supported by two columns that are arrayed, and become a lightweight structure because it's a pavilion that is meant to be dismantled and moved. So somehow minimal construction impact in its ground, with a very lightweight structure and no concrete, or little concrete at least. And then all the structure is this reinforced with those purling, which are those intermediary beams, and then somehow echoing how a leaf would look. Like you have these main structures and then the secondary ones here. And this research also becomes a publication that is narrating the story of the pavilion. And here we did this book, which also is named A Table. And A Table is the name of the pavilion, which is this invitation to be together and around the same table. And in a way, like it lives with the people that use it, and it's like a moment of celebration. And as well with this shape in the garden, it's like a carousel that talks also about movement and circularity as it's lit up at night. So from this temporary construction, we learn a lot about like how do you build in a lightweight condition, and also wood construction as a way to assemble and disassemble, reuse the material that one builds with. And I was invited on another competition for building a pavilion in Osaka for the expo that is opening this month. And we won this pavilion for Bahrain. And here I wanted to build with craftsmanship and knowledge that in like Japan they are able to master. And especially that in Japan at the moment, like, and especially in Osaka, it was very difficult to find contractors to build because of the pressure of expo building. And we decided here to like pay homage to that form, which is that of a doll. And Bahrain is a country that is surrounded by the sea, and it's like an island. And Osaka is also a place that is surrounded by the sea. And the doll making is really a testament of all the craftspeople that were building those boats and continue to build them, but also this relationship to the sea that is embodying in itself also the like travels and also connection between different countries, different people. So we were really fascinated by this kind of making of boats and the making and the wood that is involved in. And we thought for this temporary pavilion to really build this kind of open boat that is almost under construction, that echoes this unfinished state of being, but also echoes movement within that context. And we did different iterations of how this may look. Actually, the project that we submitted at the beginning was flipped, and then when we submitted, the client was like, I like this project, but why don't you flip it completely? We're like, okay, why not? So somehow also like how the client, in a way, is part of the design of the process. And then looking at some historical photos, you know, of making, what doll making means also. And we discovered that the boat of Noah was also, like the story of Noah was originally like related to the Bahrain geography. It was really interesting symbolics also of this idea of traveling and of saving in a way like animals and people through this travel on a boat. So the pavilion we propose is this kind of open structure that is really made by pieces of wood that are unengineered, so they are just like around 4 meters length, and the idea is that they can be reused completely. So because they're not engineered, so they're not laminated, they're really raw wood pieces, they're just assembled to become this kind of elevated, more than 14 meter structure, and then they could be completely reused. As one enters inside the pavilion, it becomes like a trip into this travel with the boat, but also the relationship between Bahrain and the doll making, but also pearl, harvesting, the economy that is related to that relationship to the sea, and it's kind of being in an anatomy of this kind of construction that talks about craft, that like plunges us in that story and history. And those are photos of the site recently while I was fighting with the contractors. But at the same time, the contractors were very happy because they were like, oh, this is a wood construction. We're Japanese. We really know how to build it. So we had less problems to find really construction companies to do the project, which was really great. And I think that's very important. And every time I do a project, I'm always thinking, what could be the way to build in a way that also allows a sense of pride from the constructors, and they are part of the process. This is not like imposing a technique of architecture, but really allowing to emerge and to think of what are the resources that are possible and the knowledge that is possible and how to reinstate it and make it alive again. So the pavilion will be open in a few weeks now, and hopefully if you go to Osaka, you can visit it. And moving from that scale of exhibition space and of temporary pavilion into the scale of museum, and here this is the project that I also started my practice with back in 2006. And while on a temporary pavilion, you're like maybe thinking if you make any error, it will kind of weather away. Here you build something and it's here for hundreds of years. And it was really a great experience because starting practice at 26 years old, when I won this project with 2 colleagues, was really an experience of becoming an architect. Like, what is really the role of us as architects, and what impact we have on the landscape and on the buildscape. And this is the Estonian National Museum, so it's not very far from here. And it really taught me about the relationship between architecture and climate and landscape, and really forced a kind of ecological also posture to architecture because of the conditions of the landscape. We're in Tartu, so Tartu is the cultural capital of Estonia. It's the place where Estonians have also collected and gathered the different objects that prove their relationship to a Finno-Ugric culture. And that was also a way to counter that the different occupations they had. They were under the Soviet Union until 91. A lot of Estonians were deported to Siberia. And then they joined the European Union in 2003. And in 2005, they launched this competition for their museum. One of the things that was very particular about this site was actually, it's very close to the city center, so it's like 10 minutes walk. But they assigned this as a site. And then we actually, when we were looking at this context, we discovered that there is all this kind of a scar that cuts within the landscape. And the brief didn't talk about it. And that was really particular, like this kind of scar, like a land that really cuts within the landscape. In a way, it turns out to be one of the largest military airfields of the Soviet times in the Baltic states. And it's also a bearer of a negative history in that context. And we discovered that actually this is also a site where the first museum or ethnographic museum was installed. It was installed by Jacob Hurt, and he was the first collector. And he installed this museum in a German noble house. So there's this kind of reappropriation also of like a colonizer's space into their own place and national ground. And at the same time, it's also a place, this whole ground of this field, which was named Radi, was also the place where Estonians manifested for their independence. They did this whole line of people coming from the city center all the way to the Radi area. And as an architect looking at this kind of field, it kind of opens the dreams of those utopian or even dystopian drawings of Super Studio, where you see this kind of infinite ground and like monument that is just placed in the landscape. So it became obvious that actually the museum cannot just be placed where they assigned it as a site, but it had to link to that airfield. It had to retransform really the place and maybe regenerate the meaning of and the history of that airfield, acknowledge its past, but at the same time really allow it to become part of a new realm where the past links to the future. And in a way, the museum is about that platform that becomes invisible, that is almost like an open ground for creating culture and for opening identity rather than closing identity. And at the same time, it has this kind of monumentality that talks about the past, that talks about history, and transforms that whole ground into an active one. And then we can see that the museum becomes at the same time absence, where it links to that airfield as it takes advantage of the difference in level. And as it takes off, it just like emerges bit by bit and then becomes really a presence, almost like a spirit or more like a snake sitting in the ground, and relating also to that context and to the different weather that moves from -20 in winter to +20 something in summertime. And from this monumentality, it was also important that we find again the scale, the human scale within the building. So the scale of the inside is really relating to the scale of those houses that exist within the city. And in between becomes like an open urban space, but also a place of possibility. And it was really the part that was the most challenging in like conversation with the client, how to make those spaces that necessarily they don't have a function. But for us, we defended those open spaces because those becomes the place where people meet and where culture can be really performed beyond a boutique or kind of a library space. It's a place for education, and really museums are places that more and more become very important in our cultures because there are moments, places where cultures can happen and where people can meet, where education can become accelerated. And the question is how we can evolve those structures today, and this is something that we're really carrying on in the practice today. And from the outside, this building is really like, we talked, I think the farmer's market presentation talked about like knitting, and it's true, it's something very present also in Estonia. And the knitting was a way also to counter like the occupation. So many of the gowns were like knitted with this cornflower symbol, which was a way also for creating a resistance even through like symbols in a way. And the idea was this building has like this kind of same gown that envelopes its own body, like paying homage to fabric artists, and like, for example, Anu Raud, that creates all those different patterns. And, you know, and this is where also I started to get very much interested in fabric art, and as a way of creating a new language, but also an art that has been very much feminine and very much today, like until today, a bit disregarded from being a kind of a noble art. And one of the encounters that really touched me recently is one with Olga de Amaral. So Olga de Amaral is an artist, a Colombian artist, and she's 92 today, and she spent her life knitting and creating those monumental works. And I had really the pleasure to make the exhibition design of her work in Fondation Cartier in Paris. And they plunged into the history of fabric art and this kind of relationship between like knitting, the landscape, but also the time, the relation with the hands of so many women that are making these textiles, but also the capacity of this art to become monumental, to become almost land art, or even to generate architecture. So when designing this exhibition, I really wanted to talk about this relationship with the landscape, but also bring that outside, in, like the garden of the Fondation Cartier, into the interior of the space. And some of the watercolors that I was making, like evoking this colorful like textiles that are sitting on those rocks that sit here, and then decided to use those slates that I encountered while traveling and being curious about stone as a material. And slate is really kind of a very solid material, but it has a lot of fragility as well, because just cut a little bit and it opens up, and talks about both fragility and robustness. And in a way, the whole exhibition is about relationship between the garden outside, between those slates that bring the garden inside, but also that echo the Colombian landscape that very much inspired the work of Olga. So the space of the gallery before the works is this kind of, if you've been to Paris, this very generous space that designed by Jean Nouvel, where you have this relationship to the outside. And it really allows you to think of exhibiting art differently, and I love that, because it's not like a wide gallery, and brings on the possibility of other situations and exhibition, but also maybe bringing nature as part of the architecture. Another part of her work were those brumas. So brumas are like those suspended threads that echo the sky. So while the first part of the work is about landscape, about the ground, the brumas were about like this kind of cloud of colors or rain of color. And here we suspended all those brumas, and then kind of we are in a suspension of a colorful cloud that reveals those colors inside, because we sometimes some of the work has this kind of shapes that are revealed within the threads. Really magical work, but also very impressive, because it takes so much time to make, and it's so visceral, so almost like internal as a work. And the Fondation as well has a underground space, and always in the exhibition in the Fondation, I felt the underground was this kind of leftover space. But I grew up in Beirut, and I lived many of the times in the underground because the city was bombarded, and we had to be protected. And for me, the underground is about this cocooning place. And then I found this spiral that she drew is really kind of a womb place, and wanted that the underground becomes this expression of a place that is spiraling, that is protecting one, but also that is magical. It's a place of discovery, it's a place of dream, and generally in the dark you start to play with the light, and the light becomes a space. It opens up for a new realm. And somehow echoing also the work of the textiles, like when she's making those textile work, she transforms the material and she adds to it like all those gessos. And when you see the work, it feels almost like a thick paper. So somehow bringing on that thickness of material into also that spatiality. And we don't see it in these photos, but all the walls of the basement were painted with this kind of thick material and that is textured, so increasing the materiality of the space itself. And the whole exhibition finishes with this kind of cocooning place, like a womb structure. And here, like, is the culmination of her work and those estelas that she made. And estelas are those kind of like thick, almost like a star-like pieces that echo forms like the sculptures of the park of Saint Augustine, which like really have the like a mystic kind of presence in them. And when I was looking at those stelas with this kind of shapes that are irregular, it made me think on another scale of an architecture of a project that I delivered in Beirut, in a way like this kind of a sculpture that sits in the city. And this is a building in the city of Beirut next to the port area. It's a residential building. And it's really a construction that talks about my upbringing, talks about what had been lived in that city and continue to be present. First, it's a city that is constantly rebuilt on itself. We see those towers, the old like houses that are still present. We're very close to the port area where a massive explosion happened in 2020. It's a place of life, extreme like kind of happiness, while it is constantly in apocalypse, because it's a place where people constantly are in survival mode. So you do have this kind of feeling of wanting to live really profoundly. But it's also a place that urbanly has been rewritten, like this map of Zarina Hashimi, where we can see Beirut constantly like erased and rewritten. We can see moments that have very much nourished the way I conceive of architecture, with this kind of nature that overcomes the construction, and like this fantastic, for example, staircase that goes above and allows for just the pleasure of experiencing space. Nature also existing in this kind of interstitial moments where we see a kind of informal construction happening. Moments of extreme, like where we question what is, how do we inhabit our environment, what waste do we produce, and what is waste, what is material, and kind of draws like our consciousness on the way we build, but also the interconnectedness we have with the environment as such. And the site of this project is, so I said, close to the port, and it was one of the oldest like concrete manufacturer in the area. And we see this is the building that existed before. It was a site where a famous architect actually used to have his office, modernist architect, Pierre Khoury, and it's very close to the city center. So city center of Beirut was completely destroyed after the civil war. It was rebuilt in '98, but it was rebuilt very quickly. And I remember like living like these moments and hearing my parents talk about how the city center was a place where they had souks, where like famous pastry makers were sitting there. So they had a lot of memories connected to the city center. And then when it was refurbished, it really created also an amnesia in relationship to what had happened and the war that happened in that context. And funnily enough, owner of that land where the building is a photographer, and with his family they inherited that ground. And he was commissioned in '92 to take photos of the city center, and he took these photos with Gabriel Basilico, Joseph Kodajka, and other famous photographers. And it was one of the few remainings of the memory of the city and its heart. And we could see how it was completely ravaged, but also the emergence of this kind of texture that becomes present, and that talks about this kind of violence against the built environment. We see also moments where we as humans become like the environment, frail and really fragile. So the building of Stone Garden tries to echo those moments that are lived in a way as a tower that we may think it's quite a high tower, and then we compare it with all what's happening behind it, like all the high monsters rising. And the idea was really to talk about how do we open, how do we sculpt within this mass. And we are in a seismic zone, so the whole structure is a concrete shell. And then all those openings become moments of life and become like moments that portray also another relationship to the outside and to the city. So moving from small openings to larger ones, that in a way also the windows become frames to almost like photographic frames that really portray the city within, echoing all the story of this building. So we see also this kind of absurdity of this built environment and the different vistas, one we have next to the sea, and here we see also the silo. This is actually where the explosion had happened, and then really moments of eating up volumes that remind also the way buildings were completely ravaged after the war. But for me, these openings become moments of life and where people can inhabit them, but also nature can inhabit those spaces in the same way that nature exists in Beirut, organic, free, and untamed. And maybe we can think about architecture and nature together, like maybe the building and the windows can start to inhabit different scales of nature. So moving from the small plant to a larger one, and maybe to the tree, and in a way having those different scales of nature existing within the same building. And the facade, for me, was this work of the skin that starts to become a place where we can chisel and we can work with the hand, almost like we are kind of working with the ground and inventing one's tool to work with this whole elevation. So like chiseling the elevation, working by hand again, starting with this work that is done at the studio at the scale of the model, and then that is deployed on the scale of the architecture itself. So we can see really the different forms of how this architecture deploys in the city. And then inside the apartments and the windows again, framing the outside almost like a photography within. Some of the views here. And the relationship with nature is about also grounding that building to the urban space. And like we see how the planters on the upper floor become interlinked to the ground floor itself. And the ground floor, this first level, is a gallery that is a platform for exchange and for talking about the production in the Middle East. We see here actually the building after the explosion that had happened in the port area. And it actually really withstood that explosion. Of course, all the windows were completely shattered and destroyed, but and this is the context here. But that nature stayed, and the envelope really of the whole building done by hand was just resisting this whole destruction. we took some photos. Lina Ghotmeh, who's a photographer, took also those photos of Beirut when we had the electricity crisis a few time ago, and I mean it's always the case, but it was interesting to see the building really in complete darkness and talk about also questions of flight and of lighting. And from this, actually, it inspired a book that we just published with Zumtobel and Lars Müller, which is Windows of Light, exploring moments of light and understanding what is light and how light can fashion the way we see our surrounding. I won't dwell in it. I think I'm over time, but I'll try to. But it's interesting also to look, how we evolve in our understanding of light so much, and with the production of artificial light in many places, and then in other places, there are places without light at all. Okay, thank you so much for listening. Thank you. Stay. Okay.
Just stay here with me. Okay. This was amazing.
Thank you.
I mean, obviously, I love your work. Otherwise, you wouldn't be here, right? So, but your unique sensitivity in sort of across these scales, to the tiniest little, like the appreciation for the craftsmanship, and then creating this building, and I think it's amazing, and this is exactly why we do this, why we have people like you over to share such fabulous work.
Thank you.
I do have to say that it was kind of funny that you said that Estonia was very close to here.
I mean, closer.
So I was like, oh,
so close.
It's kind of like
in terms of, let's say, in terms of weather.
Yeah, in terms of weather.
Then France or Beirut.
It's kind of like the guy who was complaining about life. It's just like, oh, life is so difficult, and the passerby just like, oh, compared to what? So it's all about context, right? And where you come from and where you stand. I do happen to know that, of course, compared to Osaka, Estonia is very, very, very close. And I do happen to know that there's people in the audience that are also doing stuff for Osaka.
Amazing.
Yeah, for the Nordic Pavilion. Gagarin Exhibition Studio is here. So you, in the afternoon, when we have the design drinks, you will have someone to talk to. And I would like to, raise this availability for everyone, because Lina is going to be there for the design drinks at the end of the day, together with Emanuele, Fernando, Ferdinando, all of these people, and the local people as well. So that's going to be amazing. But one last question, because the only thing right now between this and lunch is us. So we're just going to be...
I'm sure nobody's hungry.
So, but because I know you teach quite a lot, you're involved in the university and academia. So what is your advice today for creatives today, your architecture students? What is the advice you give them?
What advice? I think it's, for this generation, I think there should be much more perseverance and being in reality as well. I always say that as an architect, you have to have 1 foot on the ground and 1 foot up the ground, because you have to be grounded in the reality of our world and what shapes our world, but you have to always dream as well. And moreover, as youth today, where we're surrounded by technology, by AI, by social media, etc., I think they need more effort also to observe and to be part of physical reality that nourishes one's imagination, and that can also allow us to build relationships between one another, because I think architecture has the vocation to bring people together and to allow us to be in places that we build more positive relationships to one another and to the world. So I think it's a noble vocation, and I hope also the young generation can continue to lead that.
Beautiful. Were you listening? Good. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you.
Thank you. I can leave.
Like I said, next thing on our schedule is food. And there's some soup out there in Harpa. You know the deal, out on the other side. You just follow the flow. It's made from tired vegetables, and it's Cronan who is doing this. Our great collaborators have donated the tired vegetables for the soup. I don't think there are any avocados. I hope not. Anyways, be back by 1:13:10. All right, enjoy.